ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips has been backed into a corner, and he's going to punch his way out of it.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and more. We've always got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We'll have an update from Brian Smith on five-star quarterback JuJu Lewis. A lot of heavy hitters after the 2025 signal caller. And don't miss the last segment either. Is LSU in a good spot? Perhaps. That's all coming up on today's show. Let's start, however, with Jim Phillips, commissioner of the ACC. Look, he's in a tough spot. He is in a tough spot. But he spoke recently after the ACC spring meetings about everything that's going on with his conference, which is, as you may be able to discern, the biggest story in college football, the pending potential collapse of one of the Power Four leagues. And there were a couple of things that stood out in the interview that he had and quotes that he gave. First of all, he is making it abundantly clear that the ACC has no desire and no incentive to settle with FSU and Clemson, and they are going to drag out this fight. Now, that is contrary to what I thought the ACC should do, which is go to FSU and Clemson, say, look, let's meet halfway. You give us a couple $100 million each. You go to the Big Ten or the SEC. And we incentivize everybody else to stay with that inflow of cash. Because the reason, of course, FSU and Clemson won out in the first place, we can't be tens of millions of dollars behind the Big Ten and the SEC. And sure, North Carolina, as I've talked about, has made it very clear they want to leave the ACC. We don't know because Miami's being a little bit more cryptic about what they could possibly want to do. But I think that for Jim Phillips, that's a tactic I thought he would at least consider. Well, he's very much not considering that. He doesn't care what I think, obviously. He might not know what I think, but if you are listening out there, Jim, I bid you good luck because this is a trying and rather difficult process to try and deal with there. So he's not going to settle. He's backed into a corner. He's going to punch his way out of it. He is going to do everything that he can to keep those schools around. And I have no idea more than any of you over there in the YouTube comment section what the legal ramifications are, or what the legal details are, whether or not there's actually a way to force them to stay. Can they get out? My sense has always been, just from a common sense standpoint, they're going to find a way to get out. When schools want to move, where there's a will, there's usually a way. That's been my take, but I'm not a lawyer. So Jim Phillips might be thinking, hey, we got a great team of lawyers here, and they're going to enforce this grant of rights, and FSU and Clemson will be forced to stay. That'd be best case for the ACC, but FSU and Clemson seem rather motivated to not allow that to happen. So that's the first thing that stood out. The second thing, he didn't give a lot of weight to the comments from Dave Boliek, who's the UNC Board of Trustees member, that said, look, we've got to either restructure the ACC or we've got to find our way into a higher revenue league. Phillips brushed that off as, that's just chatter. That's not anything official. I don't know if everybody even knew that was happening. We've had good conversations. Everybody's acting in a positive way. Now, where have I heard that one before? I'll think on it. I think I was wearing this very shirt on that fateful day in August. But he wants to stall this thing as long as possible, feeling like that is an advantage for the ACC somehow. I guess the longer it goes on, the more money you could get out of FSU and Clemson if they are able to leave. But my take about why they should just settle with them and let them go is that you can then incentivize other members to stay. Now, maybe that wouldn't work. He knows the room, of course, far better than I. He's dealing with these people on a day-to-day basis, so he's got a better read of that particular situation. And if two schools leave, that could absolutely open the door for others to leave. I just think when you have that financial kicker, it's a different conversation. It might lead to the same result, but it also might lead to a different result of, we don't want to be behind, But if we're going to have another $30 million each here, North Carolina and Miami, maybe we'd decide to stick around there. So they want to stall this thing out, make FSU and Clemson really get into the weeds, go into the details, and try to make the case in court. It was a year ago at this time that the Magnificent Seven explored leaving and didn't. And now it's just, I think, as they're being dubbed, the Troublesome Two, FSU and Clemson. Now, is it a terrible trio if North Carolina were to join the fold and sue the ACC? They haven't done that yet, but could they? I mean, theoretically. He also spoke on the ESPN partnership and said, look, that's not being affected. That's not going away. We're having discussions, and those discussions are twofold. Number one, please do not renegotiate the deal if FSU and Clemson leave. Number two, if FSU and Clemson leave, please be willing to renegotiate the deal, because that might be the carrot that he is offering to the Seminoles and Tigers to try to convince them to stay, right? It sounds like ESPN is involved in these conversations and is not being left, out to dry. So that's at least a positive sign if you are in favor of the ACC being able to stick together and keep everybody, on the same page and in the same conference. But that Magnificent Seven pull away might not have been the worst thing. If they'd just broken away, disbanded the ACC, but then reformed it with the same teams and just done a new media rights deal that was worth more, that might make a lot of people happy. That could be a solution there. So that was another comment. Then the last one. This one gave me a chuckle. It really did. He said that, when asked about student athletes and pursuing their best interests, he said, well, if we're not thinking about the student athletes, we've lost our way. Jim, I understand this is PR jargon, jumble, whatever you want to call it. Not buying this for 1 second. You weren't thinking about the student athletes when you added Stanford, Cal, and SMU. You were thinking, I need to keep my league alive and separate from the Big 12. That's what you were thinking. Because he's right. He's right. If we are not thinking about the athletes, we've lost our way. Lost our way a while ago. Welcome to 2024. If this were August of 2022, then maybe that quote lands a little bit differently for me. But I got to tell you, I got a good laugh out of that one. I thought most of what he said was fine and solid, and what you'd want to hear from a commissioner who's absolutely in the ACC's corner, trying to keep the league alive. He doesn't have the Mike Oresco approach in the American, where he says, well, we are what we are. Let's just let teams leave, not try to get them to stay, and just take the money and work with it from there. He's not taking that approach, and I don't think that for a Power Four conference that's necessarily the approach that he should take. But yeah, we've lost our way if we're doing that. We lost that thread a long time ago in a galaxy very, very far away. In a galaxy in the future, 5-star 2025 quarterback JuJu Lewis is going to commit somewhere. Well, he's already committed to USC. Doesn't seem like he's going to stay there. That's coming up next. Before we get to JuJu, this episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You can bet everything you want for college football as well. Win totals, national title odds, conference title odds. They've even got group of 5 American and Mountain West win totals up there. Everything you could possibly want, they have over at FanDuel. I kid you not, New Mexico's win total is 1.5. Yikes. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook and our official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. JuJu Lewis, big-time quarterback in the 2025 class. Where's he going to end up? Well, he's verbally committed still to USC. and yet it doesn't feel like USC has all the momentum. Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider here at the network, brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. How likely do you think it is, Brian, that JuJu Lewis ends up sticking with the Trojans and Lincoln Riley?
If you want me to give a percentage, I'll say like 25%. That would be where I'm at. He's taken multiple trips to like Bama, Auburn, Georgia. He's been to Colorado. He's going to take an OV to Indiana. Look, just saying. I know there's a connection there with the coach or whatever, and that's fine. Those are signs that he will not end up in Los Angeles. However, know Lewis a little bit, and he's pretty blunt when he's interviewed. He's looking forward to going out to LA again to like get to know it. He even said, like, you know what, a 17-year-old in LA, I'm not from the biggest town. I need to check it out and see how I can be comfortable. I just think it's easier for him to go to like Auburn, which is 2 hours away. Georgia is about 2.5 hours away. Alabama, maybe 3. I just don't see it. And Auburn out of those is the most likely to flip him, and Freeze has got a great relationship with him. But like, regardless of where it is, my money is against the Trojans, however you want to split that up.
So Hugh Freeze is going into his second year with Auburn this season. Kalen DeBoer is going into his first year at Alabama. How important are these individual seasons going to be as they attempt to land this guy in the 2025 cycle?
Well, I mean, Julian is a uber competitive kid. Like, he gets really angry when he misses one pass. He's that guy. He's got a little Jordan syndrome in him.
He sounds like me.
Well, I'm not.
Jordan's a slightly better athlete. I was just thinking about me on the golf course, man. One shot. Oh, you idiot. Anyway, continue.
That's a whole nother story. I'm not talking golf. That is the hardest sport. But anyway, Julian's the kind of guy that wants to win. He's going to need to see something out of Auburn this year. If he flipped and Auburn just laid an egg and went 5-7, he probably ain't going there. He wants to win, but Auburn just had an incredible wide receiver class. They got to transfer in, et cetera, to help. They got a really good tight end group, et cetera. And they're building a pretty good O-line class too. Like, there's a lot to like. And Freeze is obviously proven as a play caller. That's not in question. So the question is, for him, it's not playing, it's like fit. Again, location. He's from a town that's probably got 50,000 people at most. It's a nice town called Carrollton in West Georgia, but again, smaller. It just fits Auburn better. It fits Tuscaloosa better. It even fits Athens better. I think the culture is the problem that SC has. A lot of people like LA, but do you want to live there if you're a kid from the South for 3-4 years? That's really the question, and I just don't think that's going to be the case.
Now, the counterpoint there to, the Los Angeles element is that Lincoln Riley is the quarterback whisperer in college football. Heisman Trophy winners, Heisman Trophy finalists, first round, number 1 overall NFL draft picks, of course. Is that going to be the strongest pitch USC can make to try to keep these other potential suitors at bay? Like, hey, Kalen DeBoer, he might have done this, but look at what Lincoln Riley's done. He's done it at the Power 5 level longer than Kalen DeBoer has. Is that going to be what USC probably tries to do here to keep him as a Trojan?
That's got to be part of the pitch, doesn't it? I mean, like, what you just said is it's incredible. I mean, it really is. And I'm not knocking it. It's in Los Angeles. If he was still at Oklahoma even, that would still be SEC. That would help him. Still kind of far, but he's all the way almost in the ocean. You know what I mean? Like, it's just so far away. I don't know if that's going to work. And all these other schools, they're just relentless. I know Auburn is all in on getting Julian Lewis. I just don't see that not working well. The other thing a lot of people don't know, you is a really good recruiter. So that's going to be a battle that could kind of play itself out in the long run, but maybe he even makes a decision this summer. So I know Auburn people think they're going to get it. So take it for what it's worth. USC people I've also told, they know that, like, this is not a lock just because he's committed to us. So, and I, talking to different people on both sides, it's a fascinating battle because you couldn't have two schools that are different culturally. Like, they are polar opposite. So it's what makes college football fun, though. And so, I mean, like, there is no sport with more cultural divide than college football.
No, it is. It is as I say every day on this show, Brian. It is the greatest sport on planet Earth because there's just nothing else like it. There's nothing like Saturdays. There's nothing like recruiting. There's nothing like the tradition. There's just there's nothing else like it anywhere in the world. Though, I'm a big sports fan, generally speaking, so this is not the only sport that I watch and could talk about, but it is most definitely my favorite. One thing with Lewis I'm curious about, does he expect to start as a true freshman? You look at Alabama's quarterback room, and Jalen Milroe, I believe, still has another year of eligibility. You've got Carson Beck will be off to the NFL. They've got Jaden Rashada in that room, though, as well as other names that will compete for the starting job in 2025. Auburn, of this bunch, might be the most open quarterback room because they're going to be Peyton Thorne this year, and I believe he is a senior. But also Peyton Thorne's kind of a lower ceiling guy, and does that transition feel like it would be the most seamless to, JuJu will come in and start right away at Auburn? Is that how they've gotten themselves into the fold?
That's at least got to be part of it. They've got a couple of guys that are pretty good younger players, but because of Peyton, they're not going to get to play much this year. I mean, everybody's just going in blind, and we both know first-year starting quarterbacks at any league aren't good in the SEC too. So if you're going to put one in there, I understand JuJu Lewis being your option because he's going to enroll early. He told me that a couple weeks ago, and he's going to be a kid that absorbs everything, and he's one of the rare kids, especially at his age, that can do those things quickly and make post-snap reads, understand leverage. He's really meticulous. So I don't think he doesn't even care. And again, this may sound arrogant, maybe it is. He already thinks he's the starter no matter where he goes. That's just his mindset. That's not realistic necessarily, but elite players often think that way. They can't look at something from the perspective of Spencer McLaughlin or Brian Smith. They can't do it. So I almost have to, when I interview him, I have to do it differently. It's just different kind of conversations because he is very linear. So I don't think it's going to matter to him anyway, but Auburn's is the most attractive on paper. So maybe his dad will look at it that way. His dad's very involved with the recruitment. But you know what? In college football, I've tried to predict who's going to win quarterback battles forever. I'm not very successful at it. I doubt many people are.
Well, you got a lot of
things go all kinds of directions.
Yeah, you got a lot of factors at play. Peyton Thorne, I just did a quick search, is indeed a senior, so this will be his last year of college football. And I mean, the other carrot that you've got to dangle there at Auburn is Cam Coleman. I mean, that guy.
I've seen that live.
Yeah, I mean,
I know him. That's different. Bro.
The hype around Cam Coleman at the wide receiver position, but Alabama's got a guy in Ryan Williams, and they're not exactly short on composite receiver talent in their last couple of classes. They're not really short on anything in Alabama. But I want to finish, and we're not going to say this super often on this show, but alas, here we are with the Indiana angle here, because Indiana getting it. Look, they just hired a new head coach from James Madison, where he was wildly successful. And, I've seen strange commitments before. You talk about, Colorado being in the mix as well. I remember when they landed a guy who's now in the transfer portal in Cormani McLean, and that was the first time everyone turned their heads and went, he went where? He actually went to Colorado. He didn't go to Miami. He didn't go to Florida. He didn't go to all these other places that had offered him. It would be a head-turning recruitment if either Colorado or especially Indiana, I think, landed JuJu Lewis. Do you think those two schools are on the outside looking in, and it's really just USC, Georgia, Alabama, Auburn?
I would rate it that way. Two reasons. Number one, Indiana, I believe, I could be wrong on this, all time in the FBS, the Big Five, well, the Pac-12 is no longer, so the Power Four.
R.I.P.
Yeah, there it is. They have the most losses in the power conferences all time. That's not a good stat.
Not great.
That is not good. Colorado stinks, and they've got 2 first-round picks. That is also not good. And I will be shocked if the head coach is there much longer either, because his son's going to go to the draft. And I'm not the only one in my industry that thinks that, among other people. So I just don't see why JuJu would go there. I really don't. They're not going to be very good. If I remember right, FanDuel has Colorado.
Their win total is 5. Their win total is 5.5.
Yeah, I'm going under. So.
See, I'm going over on the Buffs. I think they're a 6 or 7 win team. I don't think their schedule's that brutal. I like what they've done in the trenches, but that's perhaps a conversation for another day. Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider here at the network. Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Still more to get to on today's episode of Locked On College Football right after this. LSU has been quiet-ish in the transfer portal. Caroline Fenton, Locked On LSU, joining me here. Damonic Williams was a pretty notable target for LSU along the defensive line. He ends up going elsewhere in the SEC. Where does that leave the Tigers in their front four?
So kind of not a great situation right now for LSU. Of course, they lose Mekhi Wingo and Mason Smith, are two starting defensive tackles to the NFL draft last year with no really clear solution there. So yeah, lose out on the top 3 defensive tackles that they've been targeting in the spring transfer portal period. And Brian Kelly didn't mince any words about it in his post-game press conference after the spring, if you want to call it a post-game press conference, because a game is,
post-game-ish. Why don't we call it post-game-ish?
Post-scrimmage press conference after the spring game, he said, look, we're looking for defensive tackles in the spring transfer portal window. That's now our number one and our sole focus. So just hearing that alone, that gives you kind of some context as to how dire of a need LSU has at that position. And I'm not saying has, that needs still very much so exists. So right now, LSU is targeting some other names, maybe not the top of the market defensive lineman. One that I'm looking at is JVR Suggs. He's a former defensive tackle out of Grand Valley State. Brian Kelly started his coaching career at Grand Valley State. His son was a linebacker at Grand Valley State. So it's not necessarily a guy that we bring out of the transfer portal, a guy from a college football program of that caliber to expect to be a starter, and not even just a starter, but a difference maker at LSU and in the SEC. But right now, that's where LSU finds themselves. The one guy that I think LSU fans can at least expect to see in that position is Jacobian Guillory. He's entering into his now 4th season at LSU, and he's gotten a little bit of experience here and there, but hasn't had a ton of experience just because he's been buried on the depth chart behind a Mason Smith, behind a Mekhi Wingo over the past couple of years. So now he's being given the keys to the car. The concern there is not a ton of experience. So the defensive line right now is probably one of my biggest concerns, if not my biggest concern surrounding this LSU team. They have bodies. They just don't have a lot of experience.
Yeah, and defensive linemen have been really highly coveted in this transfer portal cycle, whether that's Damonic Williams or Simeon Barrow from Michigan State. He went down to Miami. Derek Harmon went over to Oregon, also from Michigan State. There have been a lot of guys at that position group. And, William... Yeah, Philip Bleedy coming from Indiana goes to Auburn. And Damonic Williams specifically, I think, is the example as to why. I mean, I talked about him over the course of several episodes, over several weeks here on the show, because his recruitment was taking so long, because he had a lot of different offers. It was not, I got 1, 2, maybe 3 schools. No, you're hearing from 10, 12, 20 schools that say, hey, we'd be interested in, having you come on a visit over here. And so Blake Baker comes in as the defensive coordinator from Missouri, had a great year with the Tigers last year, goes to the different Tigers now, of course, with LSU. Does he have enough to work with to allow him to shine as a new coordinator on Brian Kelly's staff?
Right now, I say no. And I actually did a podcast yesterday about looking at some of the national championship odds. And honestly, to my surprise, LSU had the 6th best odds to win the national championship. And I said, that's not a bet that I would take, because I don't trust this defense, because I don't think that there is enough proven talent on this roster right now to take the defense from where it was last year, historically, statistically, the worst defense in LSU history, to all of a sudden being just an average unit. Because I'm really high on this LSU offense. I know I sound crazy that you lose Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, and Jaden Daniels and still feel good about the offense. I do feel good about the offense. I do think the offense is going to score a lot of points. Is it going to be as explosive as it was this past season? Probably not. But I think that in order for LSU to be serious national title contenders, this defense just needs to be average. I'll take great. I'll take elite, but it just needs to be average. I don't know if they can get to that, but I said it's unproven talent, because it's a lot of guys that haven't gotten a lot of starting experience, and a lot of guys that are coming in for their true freshman seasons or coming in as starters for the first time. But those guys might be the difference between this defense being, below average to average, or average to even good, or even great. A guy that I'm looking at closely is Dominic McKinley. He's a 5-star out of Lafayette, Louisiana, a local Louisiana kid, the number 1 recruit out of the state of Louisiana that's coming in. at the defensive tackle position. It's not fair of me to say, okay, this true freshman, he needs to be the solution to this horrendous defense. That's not fair of me. But that's where Blake Baker, who's making a lot of money, Bo Davis, former Texas defensive line coach who was hired at LSU this past offseason, Kevin Peoples, former Missouri defensive line coach who's coaching up the edge rushers. That's where they make their paycheck, is coaching up the young guys and getting all of these guys that are kind of a lot of question marks just because they're unproven and have a lack of experience, getting them to that ceiling. I also think another huge determining factor one way or another of how good this defense can be. It's not on the defensive line, but it's Harold Perkins. Harold Perkins, a linebacker in his freshman season, he looked like he was a problem. He was an absolute problem. In year two, he didn't have that same impact. You didn't feel him in games as much as you did in his true freshman season. And a lot of that has to do with coaching. A lot of that has to do with the fact that he was just out of his natural position. If Blake Baker, who has a history of coaching up linebackers, period, but also at LSU, if he can coach up Harold Perkins and make that transition to the inside a little bit more seamless and give Harold Perkins kind of the tools that he needs to succeed at that position, then I think that we could be talking about a different LSU defense. But that's a big if.
That is indeed a sizable if. But one thing that's not is whether LSU is or would be a favorite over Alabama right now. So I saw this line the other day, and it was one of several I talked about on yesterday's show that really stood out to me because I saw LSU minus 2.5. Granted, they're at home in Baton Rouge in the cozy confines of the home crowd down there.
Cozy subjective. Not cozy for everybody.
Yeah, that's true. That is exceptionally true. Minus 2.5 against Alabama. Does that feel right to you? Is that how confident you feel about LSU post-spring? And certainly Alabama has undergone their fair share of turnover, but the Crimson Tide have a new coach, but the same quarterback. LSU's got the same coach, but they're going to be working in a different quarterback. Would you favor at Caroline Fenton Sportsbook, which I'm sure will be widely available very, very soon, would you favor LSU over Alabama?
It feels right now. Now, I reserve the right to change my mind once we get through a couple of games at the regular season, once we see LSU take on USC on Labor Day weekend in the first week of the season. But right now, it feels right. And frankly, I don't know if it's because that's more about LSU or because that's more about Alabama. Obviously, where that game is going to be played, like that can be the toss-up. That can be the difference. That LSU beat Alabama 2 years ago at home. You go on the road at Bryant-Denny. Alabama wins that game. If you play that game at Tiger Stadium, does it turn out differently? If you play that game in 2022 at Bryant-Denny, is the result different? I mean, that's the kind of factor that both of these stadiums and both of these fields are. But also, I don't know what to expect from this Alabama team. And Alabama is no longer getting the Nick Saban benefit of the doubt. That if you look at two teams on paper that seem really evenly matched, well, I'll say I'll take Alabama because Nick Saban is their coach. They don't have that anymore. And that's no disrespect to Kalen DeBoer. But those are pretty big shoes to fill, that he doesn't get that same benefit of the doubt as the greatest coach to ever coach the game of college football. There are a lot of changes. That's change of an offense. You're shaking up the offensive line. Alabama just lost the right tackle, J.C. Latham, to the NFL draft. You lose Isaiah Bond to the transfer portal. You lose Caleb Downs to the transfer portal. Those are really important players. So while you have that consistency, and I'll give Alabama that advantage, they have the consistency at quarterback, and it's a pretty damn good quarterback at that in Jalen Milroe. I think that with, the game being at LSU and the change at quarterback at LSU being Garrett Nussmeier, a guy that's going into his fourth season and has a decent bit of experience at this level and understands the offense because he's been learning it the last 2 seasons, I think that feels right now. Things can change.
I'll just speak from personal experience and tell you that Kalen DeBoer will have you feeling many of those same things that Nick Saban did for many, many years. I have seen it too many times. Fool me once, but Not thrice. Absolutely, positively not. Can't let that happen.
He's a great coach. I think it was a great hire by Alabama.
I think it is going to be a lot of fun to watch. Caroline Fenton, Locked On LSU. Check her out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much as always.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.